September 15th, 1940, 11:27 hours, 15,000 feet above Victoria Station, London. Sergeant Ray Holmes pulled back on his Hurricane's control column, climbing hard toward the formation of Dornier Do-17 bombers heading straight for Buckingham Palace. His guns had gone silent 30 seconds earlier, ammunition exhausted after downing one Messerschmitt and damaging a Heinkel. Below him, London burned from 3 hours of continuous bombing. Above him, German bombers flew with the confidence of men who believed they'd already won. Holmes closed the distance, 800 meters, 600, 400. The Dornier's rear gunner opened fire, tracers arcing past his canopy. Holmes didn't bank away. He kept climbing, kept closing, his mind performing calculations that had no place in any training manual. Distance, speed, angle of approach. His squadron commander's voice crackled through the radio. "Green 2, break off. You're too close." Holmes didn't break off. The Dornier was heading directly for the palace, for the king and queen who'd refused to leave London, for the symbol of Britain that must not fall. He had no ammunition left to stop it. He had only his aircraft, his will, and the understanding that some moments demand everything. 300 meters, 200. Holmes pushed the throttle forward and aimed his Hurricane's wing at the Dornier's tail section like a sword thrust. The impact came at 1128 hours, metal shrieking against metal. His Hurricane's wing shearing through the bomber's tail assembly, both aircraft shuddering from the collision. The Dornier's rear section separated completely. The bomber pitched nose down, spiraling toward earth-trailing smoke and debris. Holmes's Hurricane, wing torn half away, flipped into an inverted spin. He fought the controls for 3 seconds before realizing the aircraft was finished. He jettisoned the canopy, released his harness, and fell into cold September air above burning London. His parachute deployed at 8,000 feet. As he drifted down, he watched the Dornier crash into Victoria Station in a ball of flame. No bombs released. No palace struck. The mission stopped by a collision no German pilot had imagined possible. On the ground, Londoners who'd witnessed the ramming stood in stunned silence for a moment. Then they began cheering. Ragged, desperate cheers for a pilot who'd just proven that Britain would use anything, even their own aircraft as weapons, to defend their homeland. Holmes landed on a rooftop in Chelsea, unhurt except for bruises. German radio intercepts that evening would report, "British pilot deliberately rammed bomber over London. Suicide tactics now employed by RAF. Recommend increased escort strength." The Germans had learned something they'd never believed possible, that running out of ammunition didn't mean British pilots would stop fighting. The gathering storm. By September 1940, the Battle of Britain had been raging for 2 months. The Luftwaffe's systematic attempt to destroy the RAF as prerequisite for Operation Sea Lion, Germany's planned invasion of Britain. The numbers showed German confidence was justified. Luftwaffe strength, September 1940, operational aircraft, approximately 1,380, 750 bombers, 630 fighters. Reserve aircraft, 500 plus. Combat experience crews, 85% had flown missions in Spain, Poland, or France. Daily sortie rate, 1,000 plus aircraft. Bombing tonnage delivered, July-September, 18,000 tons. RAF fighter command strength, operational aircraft, approximately 650, primarily Hurricanes and Spitfires. Reserve aircraft, 200. Experienced pilots, 40% had never fired weapons in combat. Daily sortie rate, 400, 600 aircraft. Pilot losses, July-September, 544 killed, 791 aircraft destroyed. The Germans held numerical superiority, tactical experience, and momentum from victories across Europe. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring had promised Hitler that the RAF would be eliminated in 4 days of concentrated attacks. German bomber crews marked their aircraft with chalk tallies of cities they'd destroyed: Warsaw, Rotterdam, Paris. London would be next. The German attitude toward RAF pilots was dismissive, verging on contemptuous. Luftwaffe intelligence assessments described British pilots as adequately trained but lacking aggressive spirit, and bound by defensive mentality unsuited to modern aerial warfare. Radio intercepts captured German pilots joking about tea-drinking amateurs in obsolete aircraft. One Heinkel pilot, Oberleutnant Karl Heinz, wrote in his diary on September 10th, "The British put up token resistance but lack conviction. They break off attacks when pressed. Give them another week of proper bombing, and they'll negotiate surrender. Their fighting spirit is finished." The British, reading these intercepts through ultra-decryption, noted the German confidence with grim understanding. Let them believe what they wanted. The RAF knew something the Luftwaffe hadn't yet learned, that British pilots weren't fighting for conquest or ideology. They were fighting for survival of everything they knew. That kind of desperation created a different category of courage: the defense. RAF Fighter Command operated under crushing pressure throughout summer 1940. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding commanded the defense with meticulous precision, using Britain's secret advantage, radar, to track incoming raids and scramble fighters only when necessary. This preserved aircraft and pilots while giving impression of unlimited reserves. But the reality was desperate. Pilot losses exceeded training output. Aircraft production barely kept pace with losses. Some squadrons flew 3 or 4 sorties daily, pilots so exhausted they fell asleep in their cockpits between missions. Replacement pilots arrived with 10 hours of flight training, expected to dogfight against veterans who'd been flying combat missions for 3 years. Pilots learned quickly: conserve ammunition, make every burst count, break off when Winchester, out of ammo, land, rearm, go again. The doctrine was simple survival: stay alive long enough to defend one more raid, shoot down one more bomber, buy Britain one more day. But sometimes ammunition ran out before the mission was complete. Sometimes fuel gauges showed empty and bombers were still inbound. Sometimes pilots had to choose between breaking off and letting bombers through or finding other ways to stop them. The first recorded deliberate ramming occurred on August 18th. Flying Officer John Crossley, Hurricane pilot with 32 Squadron, exhausted his ammunition engaging a formation of Junkers Ju-88 bombers. Rather than disengage, he closed distance and struck a Ju-88's tail with his propeller, destroying the bomber but severely damaging his own aircraft. He made emergency landing, with propeller blades bent backward and engines seized. His squadron commander asked what happened. Crossley replied simply, "Ran out of bullets, sir. Seemed ashamed to waste the approach." The incident was noted in squadron logs, but not widely publicized. Fighter Command didn't encourage ramming. It was desperate measure that destroyed valuable aircraft and risked trained pilots. But they didn't forbid it either. Sometimes desperation was the only option left. The Day of Eagles. September 15th, 1940, later designated Battle of Britain Day, brought the largest Luftwaffe assault of the campaign. The Germans launched 2 massive waves, 100-plus bombers in the first wave at mid-morning, 150-plus in the second wave early afternoon. Fighter escorts numbered nearly 400 Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and Bf-110s. The objective was overwhelming destruction of London and annihilation of RAF fighter reserves that intelligence insisted must be nearly exhausted. Goering watched from the French coast, confident this would be the decisive blow. The RAF has perhaps 200 fighters remaining, he told his staff. By tonight, Britain will have no air force. RAF Fighter Command scrambled every available squadron. Hurricanes took lower altitudes, engaging bombers directly. Spitfires climbed higher, dueling with fighter escorts. The sky over London became layered chaos. Aircraft climbing, diving, trailing smoke, colliding accidentally in the confusion. Sergeant Ray Holmes took off from Hendon Aerodrome at 10:45 hours with 504 Squadron, 12 Hurricanes forming up in sections of 4. His flight leader briefed the mission during climb-out. Bombers inbound from south. Vector 270. Angels 15. Engage bombers, ignore fighters unless directly threatened. At 11:05 hours, they made contact. A formation of Dornier Do-17s, flying in tight V formation at 15,000 feet, heading straight for central London. Holmes's section dove to attack, Hurricanes plunging through the escort screen, taking hits from defensive fire, but pressing attacks home. Holmes fired at a Dornier from 200 meters, saw his rounds strike the bomber's port engine, watched it catch fire and peel away from formation. He pulled up, reversed, dove on another bomber, held the trigger down until his Hurricane shuddered from empty ammunition belts. Winchester, out of ammo. Standard procedure, break off, return to base, rearm. But through his canopy, Holmes could see the remaining Dorniers maintaining formation, heading directly for Westminster. Below, he could see Buckingham Palace clearly, the Union Jack flying from the roof, signifying the King was in residence. The King who'd refused to evacuate to Canada despite government urgings. The Queen who'd said, "The children won't go without me, I won't go without the King, and the King will never leave." Holmes understood the symbolism immediately. If bombers struck the palace, if the King and Queen were killed, British morale would shatter. The psychological impact would be devastating. This formation had to be stopped. He scanned the sky. No other RAF fighters in immediate vicinity, all engaged with other threats. The bombers were perhaps 2 minutes from bomb release point. He had no ammunition, no time to break off and let someone else handle it. He had only his Hurricane and the understanding that sometimes a fighter aircraft could be used as a weapon in itself. Holmes increased throttle and dove toward the lead Dornier, the mathematics of collision. What Holmes contemplated had no place in tactical doctrine, but it had mathematical logic. A Hurricane Mark I weighed approximately 3,000 kilograms fully loaded. At 500 kilometers per hour, it carried enormous kinetic energy, enough to shear through aluminum aircraft structure like an axe through plywood. A bomber's tail section was its most vulnerable structural point. Destroying vertical stabilizers and elevators would render aircraft uncontrollable. The bomber would crash, regardless of whether its engines still functioned. The risks were absolute. Collision at combat speed would likely destroy both aircraft. The fighter pilot had perhaps 50-50 chance of surviving if he could bail out after impact. The bomber crew would have essentially no chance. A broken tail meant unrecoverable spin, with no time for parachute escape. But the mathematics worked. One fighter deliberately sacrificed could guarantee one bomber destroyed. Better odds than typical ammunition-based attacks, which required sustained accuracy against defended targets. Holmes had perhaps 5 seconds to make the calculation. He made it. He aimed for the Dornier's tail, approaching from slightly below and behind to minimize exposure to defensive fire. The German rear gunner saw him coming, opened fire, but Holmes's approach angle made accurate aiming difficult. Tracers crossed above his canopy. 300 meters, 200, 100. Holmes braced himself, pulled the control column back slightly to raise his Hurricane's port wing, the wing that would strike first, that would absorb the initial impact. The collision happened at 1128 hours, metal shrieking, his Hurricane bucking violently, cockpit filled with noise of tearing aluminum and disintegrating structure. The Dornier's tail section separated completely, spinning away. The bomber pitched nose down immediately, entering flat spin that would be unrecoverable. Holmes's Hurricane, port wing torn away, flipped, inverted. He had seconds before centrifugal force would pin him in the cockpit. He jettisoned the canopy, released harness, pulled himself out into the slipstream. His parachute deployed at 8,000 feet, silk canopy snapping open, sudden deceleration after the chaos of combat. He drifted down through smoky London air, watching the Dornier strike Victoria Station in a massive explosion. No bombs released. Mission failed. Palace saved. He landed on a Chelsea rooftop 20 minutes later, climbed down through a building, and walked out to find a crowd gathered around his parachute. An elderly woman handed him a cup of tea. "Well done, young man," she said simply. "Well done, indeed." The German response. News of the ramming reached Luftwaffe units that evening through survivor reports and British radio intercepts. The reaction was shock, verging on disbelief. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine had no category for deliberate collision attacks. Ramming was desperation tactic used by poorly trained or ideologically fanatical pilots, certainly not by professional air forces of Western powers. Yet here was confirmation. An RAF pilot had deliberately destroyed his own aircraft to bring down a bomber. Not accidental collision. Deliberate ramming as calculated tactical choice. Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann, Heinkel pilot who'd participated in the September 15th raid, wrote in his diary, "British pilot rammed Dornier over London today. Intentionally. Suicide attack to stop bombing. Command says it's isolated incident, but I wonder, if British are this desperate or this committed, how many more will do same thing? How do you defend against pilot who uses his aircraft as weapon?" This changes everything we assumed about RAF fighting spirit. German intelligence assessments, previously dismissive of RAF morale, suddenly included new category: fanatical defensive tactics, including deliberate collision attacks. Bomber crews requested additional fighter escort. Some crews refused missions over London unless escort-to-bomber ratio improved. Göring, informed of the ramming, dismissed it publicly as isolated act of desperation by defeated Air Force, but privately ordered tactical review. Luftwaffe combat doctrine was revised to increase separation between bombers, reduce formation density, and improve defensive countermeasures against suicide tactics. The psychological impact was significant. German bomber crews had operated with confidence, bordering on arrogance. Superior numbers, superior experience, inevitable victory. The ramming introduced doubt. If British pilots were willing to die deliberately to stop bombers, if running out of ammunition only meant switching to collision tactics, then perhaps the RAF wasn't nearly beaten. Perhaps this campaign would be harder than promised. The aftermath. Holmes's ramming wasn't the only incident. Fighter command records document at least 6 confirmed deliberate collisions during the Battle of Britain, plus dozens of near misses where pilots considered ramming but broke off at last moment. Most were Hurricanes, the RAF's workhorse fighter. Less glamorous than Spitfires, but more numerous and more expendable. Hurricane pilots, often assigned bomber interception, while Spitfires, dueled with escorts, faced frequent ammunition exhaustion situations. Some chose ramming. Most survived. The bombers rarely did. Flying Officer Eric Nicholson of 249 Squadron rammed a Messerschmitt Bf 110 on September 16th after his Hurricane's guns jammed. The collision destroyed both aircraft. Nicholson bailed out severely burned, landed in Channel, was rescued by motor torpedo boat. He survived and received the Victoria Cross, the only VC awarded during Battle of Britain. The tactic was never officially endorsed. Air Ministry directives never mentioned ramming as acceptable procedure. But squadron commanders quietly acknowledged that pilots who made that choice wouldn't face courts-martial. It was desperate measure for desperate times. Regrettable, but sometimes necessary. The Germans never adapted adequately. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine remained built on assumptions of rational self-preservation, that pilots would prioritize survival over mission completion, that running out of ammunition ended engagement. They never fully internalized that British pilots defending their homeland operated under different mathematics, where aircraft were replaceable and pilots were replaceable, but allowing bombers through to kill civilians was unacceptable. By October 1940, the daylight bombing campaign was failing. Luftwaffe losses exceeded sustainable levels. Bomber formations refused to fly over London without massive fighter escort. Fighter escort consumed so much fuel they could remain over target for only minutes. The whole operational concept was collapsing. On October 12th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion was off. Britain would not be conquered. The RAF, outnumbered, outgunned, exhausted, had won simply by refusing to be defeated. The lesson. The Battle of Britain proved axiom that British had understood for centuries. That will matters more than numbers. That defending home provides motivation no aggressor can match. That losing gracefully was never British tradition. The Germans had more aircraft. They had more experience. They had momentum from unbroken victories across Europe. But they were fighting for conquest. Abstract goal that meant different things to different pilots. The British were fighting for London, burning below them, for the king refusing to evacuate, for families sheltering in underground stations, for homeland that would fall if they failed. That kind of motivation created different category of combat determination. When RAF pilots ran out of ammunition and kept fighting by ramming, they were demonstrating fundamental truth about defensive warfare, that defenders fighting for survival have options attackers never consider. Suicide tactics were irrational in wars of conquest. Throwing away pilots and aircraft for marginal gains made no sense. But in defensive warfare, trading one fighter to stop one bomber from reaching target could be perfectly rational calculation. The Luftwaffe never adapted to this mathematics. Their doctrine remained built on assumptions appropriate for offensive warfare: preserve forces, maintain numerical advantage, accept marginal losses for strategic gains. Against enemy willing to trade aircraft one for one to prevent bombs falling on their capital, those assumptions failed. By December 1940, the Blitz had shifted to night bombing, tacit admission that daylight operations were unsustainable. By June 1941, Luftwaffe units were withdrawing from France for Operation Barbarossa. The Battle of Britain was over. Britain had won. The Sky over London, September 15, 1941. 1 year after the ramming. Ray Holmes stood at Hendon Aerodrome watching new pilot class receive their wings. Young men, barely 20, about to join squadrons defending Britain. The air battle had moved beyond Britain now, RAF bombers striking German cities, fighters escorting them, the defensive war becoming offensive. But Holmes remembered that September morning, when ammunition ran out and options narrowed to one. He remembered the decision that seemed obvious at the time: use the aircraft itself as weapon. He remembered the collision, the parachute descent, the tea afterward. He wondered if he'd do it again. The answer came immediately. Yes, without hesitation. Because that was the job. Stop the bombers. Protect the people below. Use whatever means necessary. That willingness, that matter-of-fact acceptance that sometimes the aircraft you flew was the last weapon remaining, had saved Britain. The Germans had laughed at RAF pilots, called them amateurs, predicted they'd break within days. Instead, British pilots had fought until they ran out of bullets, then kept fighting with their aircraft itself. They'd rammed bombers mid-air, bailed out, landed, climbed back into new aircraft, and gone up again the next day. That wasn't desperation. That was simply British. The grey September sky that had once filled with German bombers was quiet now, except for training flights. London still stood. The king still lived in the palace. Britain remained unconquered, defended by pilots who'd proven that running out of ammunition only meant switching tactics, not surrendering. The Germans had learned their lesson too late, that British pilots defending their homeland would use anything, bullets, aircraft, their own lives, to stop bombers reaching target. That casualness with which they accepted this, that understated courage, that refusal to acknowledge their own bravery as anything special, that was strength the Luftwaffe had never encountered and never understood. Ray Holmes walked back toward the hangar, where his new Hurricane waited. The war continued. The job continued. And if ammunition ran out again, well, the aircraft itself weighed 3 tons and moved at 500 kilometers per hour. That was weapon enough. The sky belonged to Britain. The Germans had laughed at that claim in 1940. By 1941, they'd learned better. British pilots had taught them, one ramming at a time, that determination was deadlier than any gun.